Saved by Grace, the Rockstar and Grace. Life may change in an instant. Times when the future you thought you would have falls apart, when the spotlight goes out, when the applause stops, and you're left alone in the stillness of your own brokenness. Sometimes you have to lose everything you worked hard to build to see what God can build with His own hands. This is a story about a moment like that. A moment that changed a man's life and rescued his soul. Saved by Grace. The Rockstar and Grace tells the story of Elias Rivers, a pop star who is famous all over the world and whose life was full of excitement on stage. A man who is loved by millions but not known by any. A guy that was quietly drowning in celebrity, loudness, and the empty promises of a life spent far from God. And then one night, with a loud crash, the music stopped. He lost his voice, which was the fundamental component that made him who he was. His job fell apart. His sense of self was broken. His world became quiet. But sometimes God speaks the loudest while he is quiet. In the quiet of his brokenness, Elias came face to face with the truth. Without his voice, his fame, and the noise, all he had left was the emptiness he had been running from his whole life. And that's when Grace came in. Grace Holland was a quiet, steady therapist with a kind strength and a faith that wouldn't give up. She didn't come with any judgment. She didn't come to help him. She sat with him in the dark until he was ready to see the light again. Grace helped Elias find the God he never knew through months of prayer, patience, and being there for him. This God saw him, loved him, and wouldn't let him be broken. This audiobook takes you on a journey through pain, healing, and redemption. Through quiet prayers and miracles that come out of nowhere. By taking apart a man that the world felt it owned. And the restoration of a man that God had already claimed long before he ever stepped on stage. It is a story about a voice that was restored, not for fame, but for worship. A narrative about love that is soft, patient, and comes from the fractures of brokenness. A narrative of grace, both in the woman and in God's power to save. May you hear more than just words as you listen. May you hear the heartbeat of a God who saves. A God who gives life back. A God who joins us in the quiet and offers us a fresh song to sing. This isn't just a story of a rock star who got his voice back. It's about a soul that has come back to life. This is Saved by Grace, the Rockstar and Grace. A narrative of love, redemption, and a God who still works miracles. Let's get started. Chapter 1. Before the Fall. Elias Rivers lived for the noise. Every night, the lights, the screaming fans, the cameras flashing like lightning, it was the only world he knew. At 29, he had broken every chart record the industry had created for him. Stadiums sold out in minutes. His face plastered on billboards. His life one long reel of excess, parties, alcohol, late nights, and endless noise. Noise outside. Noise inside. His team loved it. His fans loved it. The world loved the image of a wild pop star who burned bright and burned loud. But when all the lights went out and the doors closed, Elias sat alone in hotel rooms that cost more per night than some people made in a month. He never admitted it out loud, but loneliness clung to him like a second skin. He pushed it down anyway. Someone always had a good time waiting for him, another party, another club, another night he wouldn't remember in the morning. His manager, Troy, fed that life with a smile. Keep the image going, Eli. It sells. They love you messy. Messy was profitable, but messy was killing him. On the night everything changed, Elias was performing at a private party in Los Angeles. The house glowed like a palace, the music blasting through walls, people dancing on tables and spilling champagne like water. Elias had been drinking long before he arrived. His vision blurred. His words slurred. But no one cared. They wanted the wildness. They cheered for it. When he finally stumbled out the door, at nearly 3 a.m., Troy clapped him on the back. Cars waiting. Sleep it off. Tomorrow we do it again. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Elias slid into the back seat of the sleek black SUV, closing his eyes. The driver pulled away. Elias didn't know he fell asleep. He didn't know he would wake up to the sound of metal tearing like paper. He didn't know this was the last night the old Elias Rivers would ever exist. The impact came sudden and violent. A blinding crash. Screeching tires. Shattered glass. The world spun into darkness. And when he woke in the hospital, tubes in his throat and pain searing through his entire body, he tried to speak, only to discover that the voice that had made him famous was silent. The doctors explained it gently, but nothing could soften the blow. A crushed larynx. Severe damage. Uncertain recovery. His career gone in seconds. His identity gone. His noise replaced by silence. And for the first time in his life, Elias Rivers truly heard himself. He did not like what he heard. Chapter 2: The Silence. The hospital room felt like a cage. For weeks, Elias lay there, unable to talk, unable to scream, unable to sing. He tried forming words, but nothing came out, only a dry, broken rasp that sounded like someone else's voice. The nurses spoke softly around him, adjusting machines and giving polite smiles. They didn't recognize him at first. Without his tousled hair, without the leather jacket, without the smirk the tabloids loved to photograph, he looked ordinary, fragile, human. When they finally recognized him, some stared with pity. Others whispered, "Poor guy, that voice was everything. His career's over." Fame doesn't protect you from life. He heard all of it. Every word. Every whisper. His manager, Troy, visited once, standing awkwardly at the end of the bed. "Eli, look, we'll figure something out. Maybe a press conference. Maybe a statement about recovery. The fans will wait." But his tone said otherwise. Without the voice, there was no profit. Troy left quickly, his phone already buzzing with new opportunities. Weeks turned into months. Elias returned to his mansion, a cold, modern house on a hill overlooking the city. It felt enormous, empty, and hollow, like a monument to the old life he no longer recognized. He drifted from room to room, unable to speak, unable to sing, unable to escape himself. He avoided mirrors. He avoided people. He avoided God, though, truthfully, he'd never really known him. Anger took root like a poison vine. Anger at the doctors. Anger at the drunk driver who caused the accident. Anger at the world. Mostly, anger at himself. His staff tiptoed around him. Some quit. Some stayed only out of obligation. His house felt like a museum of who he used to be: gold records, awards, posters, plaques. Achievements he could no longer celebrate. One morning, Elias threw a trophy against the wall, shattering it into pieces. The sound echoed through the mansion, filling the silence for just a moment, then fading again. He sank to the floor, broken, exhausted, alone. And that was when his assistant, Maria, told him quietly, "I hired someone to help you. A therapist. Not the medical kind, the emotional kind. Someone who works with trauma, recovery, and life transitions." He wanted to fire her for it. Instead, he ignored her. Until the woman showed up the next day. The woman who would change everything. Grace. Chapter 3: When Grace Walks In. Grace Holland arrived at Elias's door with a soft smile and a small notebook tucked under her arm. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, her eyes warm and steady. She was the opposite of his world. And Elias hated her instantly. He didn't want help. He didn't want kindness. He wanted to be left alone to rot in his bitterness. But Grace stepped into his home like she belonged there, not intimidated by the gold records or the cold atmosphere. She looked around thoughtfully, then turned to him. "Elias," she said softly, "thank you for letting me come." He didn't. But Maria had. He crossed his arms and looked away. Grace didn't falter. She began visiting 3 times a week, sitting with him, asking questions he refused to answer, offering exercises he refused to try. She spoke gently about trauma, healing, silence, and grief. He ignored her, but Grace didn't leave. She came back again, and again, and again. One day, she brought him a small whiteboard. "So, you can speak without speaking," she said with a smile. He almost rolled his eyes. But later that night, he picked up the marker. The first thing he wrote was, "Why do you care?" Grace read the words the next day and answered without hesitation, "Because God cares about you. And I'm here because He put you on my heart." He glared at her. God? God had abandoned him, if he ever existed at all. Grace didn't push. She didn't preach. She didn't try to convert him. Instead, she simply lived out her faith quietly, consistently. She prayed before meals. She spoke hope into dark moments. She carried peace like it was something she wore. Slowly, Elias began to watch her. How she moved, how she spoke, how her presence shifted the heaviness in the room. For the first time since the accident, the silence didn't feel as suffocating. Chapter 4: Light Breaking Through. Grace never treated Elias like a project. She didn't tiptoe around him or pity him. Instead, she talked to him like he was a person worth knowing, not a fallen celebrity, not a broken voice, not a failed superstar. Just a man learning how to breathe again. Her presence was steady, like morning sunlight slipping through the cracks of dark curtains. Every visit started the same way. She would knock gently. He would pretend not to hear. She would walk in anyway. Her routine became familiar. Take off her shoes at the door, set her notebook on the coffee table, and sit in the same blue armchair across from him. "We don't have to rush anything," she would say each time. "Healing happens one honest moment at a time." At first, Elias ignored her. But over time, something in him softened. Not much, but enough that he started writing more than one-word answers on the whiteboard. One afternoon, he finally wrote, "I'm tired." Grace read the words slowly, letting their weight settle between them. "I know," she whispered. "You've carried a lot for a long time." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held strength, the kind of strength that comes from knowing storms personally. She didn't ask him to expand. She didn't push for details. Instead, she closed her notebook. "Let's sit outside today." He almost refused, but something in him wanted air. So, he followed her to the back patio where the city stretched out below his mansion, a glittering skyline, busy and beautiful. He had looked at this view for years but had never seen it. Grace leaned against the railing, letting the breeze lift her hair. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he wrote. Never paid attention. She smiled. "Maybe now you can." They stood there quietly for several moments. The wind seemed to breathe for him when he couldn't. Then Grace said, "You don't have to understand everything right now. You just have to take the next small step." He wrote, "And that is?" "Letting light in again," she answered. "Just a sliver. Just enough to remember that darkness isn't all there is." He didn't reply. But he didn't walk away either. And that was something. Over the next months, Grace guided him through exercises, breathing, journaling, grounding, emotional reflection. Some days he resisted entirely. Other days he followed her instructions reluctantly. But the more she returned, the more he found himself wanting to try. He hated admitting it, but he looked forward to her visits. She brought warmth into rooms he'd shut down. She spoke to him like he mattered. She prayed for him, quietly, softly, when she thought he was asleep in his recliner. He wasn't. He heard every word. "God, touch his heart. Let him feel your nearness. Give him peace in the places where he feels alone." The first time he heard her pray, something unfamiliar stirred in him, something that felt like longing, or maybe hope he wasn't ready to name. He wiped his eyes before she saw. One evening, Grace surprised him by bringing a keyboard into the living room. His heart squeezed at the sight of it. Chapter 5: Cracks in the Armor. Grace's presence was becoming a rhythm in Elias's life, steady, reliable, something his restless soul could lean against without fear of collapsing. But healing was not a straight line. It never has been. Some days Elias felt strong enough to walk through the garden with her, breathing in the scent of lavender and fresh air. Other days he couldn't even get out of bed. Grace never judged him for it. She simply adjusted. One Monday morning, she arrived to find him sitting on the staircase, head hanging between his hands, shoulders trembling. He didn't turn when she approached. He didn't move when she sat beside him. After a long moment, she whispered, "Hard day?" He didn't trust his hands to write anything. Didn't trust his emotions not to spill over. Grace waited. Eventually, with shaking fingers, he picked up the whiteboard. "I'm tired of being broken." Grace nodded slowly. "I know. Healing feels like climbing a mountain barefoot, alone in the dark." He stared at her. "Then why does God allow it?" Grace didn't rush her answer. She let the question breathe, because she'd asked the same one once. "Because broken things, in God's hands, become beautiful," she said softly. "He doesn't cause the pain, but He meets us in it. And He reshapes what life tried to destroy." Elias closed his eyes. "Beautiful?" He felt anything but. He wrote, "Nothing good can come out of this." Grace gently took the whiteboard from his hands, set it aside, and looked him in the eyes. "Elias, God does His best work in ruins." Her words hit him like a wave. In the following weeks, Elias found himself opening up little by little. Not much, just cracks in the armor he'd built over the years. But Grace noticed every shift, every softening. He started walking outside more often. He started using the piano for a few minutes at a time. He started writing longer sentences instead of one-word replies. His questions grew deeper, more vulnerable, more raw. "Do you really think God can use someone like me? I've messed up too much, right? Why would He want me?" Grace answered each question with calm, unwavering conviction. "God specializes in using people who've hit rock bottom. Your past doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. He wants you because He created you, not because you're perfect." One afternoon, as they sat across from each other in the living room, Grace gently asked, "What scares you the most?" Elias hesitated, then wrote, "That this is all my life will ever be." Grace leaned forward. "It won't. Not if you let God into the parts of you you've kept locked away." He swallowed hard. She continued, "Pain doesn't get the final say. God does." But Elias was still Elias, stubborn, guarded, trying to pretend he didn't care as much as he did. He pushed Grace away at times, retreating into old patterns. Days when he didn't answer the door. Days when he refused to participate in exercises. Days when the anger returned full force, and he wanted to destroy everything in sight. One day he snapped, slamming the whiteboard to the ground, storming out of the room, refusing to look at Grace. He wanted her gone. He didn't want someone to see him this undone. Grace didn't yell. She didn't walk out offended. She simply waited. Later, she found him sitting alone on the floor of his music studio, surrounded by broken sheets of old lyrics, songs he once believed defined him. She knelt beside him. "You're not your mistakes," she whispered. "You're not your past." He stared at the mess around him. Grace gently placed a hand over his. "You're allowed to fall apart," she whispered. "Just don't do it alone." Those words shattered something inside him. For the first time, he reached for her hand. Not romantically, not desperately, but truthfully. For the first time, Elias let himself need someone. From that day on, Grace pushed a little deeper. Not into his trauma, into his beliefs. Or rather, the absence of them. "You know," she said one afternoon while watering plants in his kitchen, "God isn't waiting for you to prove anything. He's waiting for you to let Him love you." Elias wrote, "Why would He love me?" "Because He loved you before you ever sang your first note," she answered. "Because He loved you on every stage. He loved you during every mistake. And He loves you right now, even in the silence." He stared at her. She wasn't trying to convince him with theology. She was speaking from experience. From truth she lived, not just quoted. And something started stirring in him, a longing, a hunger, a spark of hope he tried to ignore but couldn't. One evening, Grace stayed later than usual. The sky was painted orange and purple, the city lights flickering like fireflies below. They sat on the patio in comfortable silence. Grace finally asked, "Do you want to pray tonight? You don't have to speak. I can pray. You can just listen." Elias hesitated, but he nodded. Grace bowed her head. "Father, thank you for Elias. Thank you that you're healing him piece by piece. Remind him that he is not forgotten, not abandoned, not hopeless. Remind him that your plans for him didn't end with the accident they began. Draw him close to you. Show him your heart. Amen. When she lifted her head, Elias' eyes were wet. Not from sadness. From something deeper. Something awakening. Something he didn't yet understand. But Grace did. The cracks in his armor weren't weaknesses. They were openings. Openings where light could finally enter. Chapter 6. The God Who Sees. The shift in Elias was quiet, almost imperceptible, but real. Grace noticed it in the way he breathed deeper, in the way he paused before reacting, in the way he looked at the world outside his mansion, not with bitterness, but with cautious curiosity. Healing is slow. Redemption is slower. But God works in the slowness. Grace saw it. Elias felt it. Even if he couldn't admit it out loud, or on the whiteboard, something inside him was turning toward the light. One morning, Grace walked into the house and found Elias in the music room, sitting at the piano bench. He didn't touch the keys. He just sat there, staring at them, his jaw tense as if fighting a war behind his eyes. Grace stepped into the room quietly. Couldn't sleep? He shook his head. Nightmares, she asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. Grace sat beside him, giving him space while still being near. Do you want to write about it? Slowly, Elias picked up the whiteboard. I dreamed I was singing. Grace's eyes softened. He wrote again. It was so real. And then his hand shook. I woke up and wanted to die. Grace inhaled sharply, her heart breaking for him. She didn't panic. She didn't scold. She simply scooted closer until their shoulders were almost touching. Loss feels like a shadow, she whispered. It follows you even into your dreams. He closed his eyes. But shadows only exist where there is light, she continued. Even your dreams remind you that what God gave you is not lost. His eyes snapped open. Grace smiled softly. Not lost. Just waiting. He didn't understand what she meant. Not fully. Not yet. But those words stayed lodged in his chest like small embers refusing to go out. Later that day, Grace invited him to take a walk in the garden. The sun was warm but not harsh. The air smelled of roses and pine. Birds scattered when they approached, humming their own melodies without shame or effort. Elias lingered near a small fountain, a stone angel pouring water from a jug into a pool below. Grace watched him carefully. You know, she said softly, in the Bible there's a story about a woman who felt unseen, unloved, forgotten. She was running from her problems, hiding in the desert, convinced God didn't care where she was. Elias lifted the whiteboard, curious. Grace continued. God sent an angel to her, and she called him by a name, El Roy, the God who sees me. She touched the angel's statue lightly. I share that because I need you to know, Elias, God sees you. He looked away, jaw tight. She continued anyway. He sees the moments when you want to give up. He sees the fears you don't write down. He sees the nights you sit awake replaying everything you've lost. He sees your heart, even when you hide it. He closed his eyes, fighting the sting behind them. Grace touched his arm gently. You've been unseen for a long time. People saw the star, not the man. But God sees you. The real you. His breath trembled. Then he wrote, Why would God care? Grace turned toward him. Because you're his. Because he created you. Because he never stopped loving you, even when you didn't love yourself. He shook his head slowly. Grace rested a hand over his. Elias, God sees you. Not as a broken singer. Not as a failed celebrity. Not as a man who lost his voice. Her voice softened to a whisper. He sees you as a son. Her words cracked something open inside him. He had never been anyone's son, not really. His parents were distant, busy, uninterested in music until it made him famous. He grew up in the shadows of his own home, not seen, not known. But hearing Grace say that, hearing that the creator of the universe saw him, it did something to him. Something holy. Something terrifying. Something hopeful. He wiped his eyes quickly. Grace didn't comment.
She didn't need to.
Sometimes healing is not in the talking. It's in the presence. That night, Elias did something has never done. He knelt beside his bed.
He couldn't speak.
Couldn't pray with words. Couldn't even form sentences in his mind. So he knelt. Just knelt.
Heart open.
Fear trembling. Soul reaching for something, someone he wasn't sure he deserved. He looked up at the ceiling. God. That was all. That one word held everything: confusion, longing, pain, hope. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Maybe that was prayer enough. The next time Grace arrived, something in him felt lighter. She noticed. You look different today, she said with a smile. He shrugged self-consciously. She sat beside him on the sofa. What happened? Slowly he wrote. I tried talking to God. Grace's eyes softened with warmth. And he hesitated, then wrote. I don't know if he heard me. Grace smiled gently. Oh, Elias, he heard you long before you knelt. He's been listening for years. He stared at her, unsure if he believed that. But a small flame flickered inside his chest. A flame called hope. Over the next several weeks, they prayed together more frequently.
Grace pray.
And out loud. Elias prayed in silence. Healing flowed slowly, like water filling a cracked vessel drop by drop. Grace taught him small scriptures, showed him how to breathe through panic, encouraged him to write letters he never sent, helped him release things he'd been carrying for a lifetime. And through it all, Elias began to see something he hadn't noticed before. The God who sees was seeing him, not the superstar, not the failure, not the man without a voice. The man who is learning to live again. But God doesn't awaken a soul without preparing it for transformation. Something was coming. Something he didn't expect. Something he wasn't ready for. A miracle, wrapped in the quietest whisper. And it would happen soon. Very soon. He hesitated, then placed both hands on the keys. A soft melody drifted into the air, gentle, hesitant, but beautiful. Grace listened with her eyes closed, letting every note settle into the room. You're amazing, she whispered. He shook his head.
No.
Not anymore. But Grace believed it. She always had. When the melody faded, Grace asked something she had never dared ask before. Can I pray for your voice today? Elias stiffened. She noticed. We don't have to. Only if you're ready. He swallowed hard. Ready was not the right word. Terrified was closer. Hopeful was somewhere tangled in between. But he nodded anyway. Grace reached out and placed a soft hand over his throat. Her touch was gentle, reverent, like she understood how sacred this moment was to him. Father, she whispered, you created this voice. You breathed breath into these lungs. You gave him a gift meant to glorify you. The world tried to steal it. Life tried to silence it. But you restore what is broken. God, touch his voice. Bring healing where there has been destruction. Let your power do what doctors said was impossible. Her prayer settled over the room like warm sunlight. Elias closed his eyes. And something inside him shifted. A warmth spread through his throat, soft at first, then growing, pulsing like a heartbeat. His skin tingled. His breath caught. Grace opened her eyes, sensing the shift. Elias, what is it? He grabbed the whiteboard with shaky hands. Warm. Grace's eyes widened. Where? He pointed to his throat. She placed her hand gently over the spot, feeling the heat radiating beneath the skin. Her breath trembled. God's doing something, she whispered. They sat there, unsure of what to say, unsure of what it meant, but certain that heaven had touched earth. Over the next few days, Elias noticed strange changes. Small things. Subtle things. A faint buzz when he tried to hum. A vibration in his chest when he breathed deeply. A tingling sensation when he attempted to speak. Grace noticed, too. You're healing, she said with a soft smile. He wasn't convinced. But a spark of hope lit inside him, a spark he couldn't extinguish even when fear tried to smother it. One afternoon, Grace and Elias sat on the patio overlooking the city. The breeze rustled the leaves. Birds chirped. The world seemed unusually alive. Grace turned to him. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Would you just try, to form one sound today?" His eyes widened in panic. Grace reached for his hand. "Only if you want to." He hesitated. His heart pounded. His throat tightened. What if nothing came out? What if he failed? What if he broke something again trying? Grace squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay if it doesn't work. It's okay if it's barely anything. This isn't pressure. It's possibility." Possibility. The word lingered. Elias inhaled slowly. His chest rose. His throat tightened. His lips parted. He pushed. A sound escaped, soft, shaky, barely more than a breath. But it was a sound. Grace's eyes filled instantly. "Try again," she whispered. He tried. A second sound. Louder.
Raw. Broken.
But real. Elias froze. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You spoke," she whispered. "Elias, you spoke." He hadn't spoken in months. Not one word. Not one sound. His throat burned, but not with pain, with life. He tried again, pushing gently, cautiously. G. A faint rasp. Then another attempt. Grace. Her breath caught. She turned toward him, tears streaming freely now. "Say it again," she whispered. He swallowed, throat trembling, then tried once more. "Grace." The word came out broken, fragile, cracking at the edges, but unmistakably a word. Her name. The first word his voice reclaimed. Grace lunged forward and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Not dramatic sobs, but deep, grateful ones, the kind that come from witnessing a miracle unfold before your eyes. Elias clung to her, overwhelmed, shaking with emotion he couldn't contain. Grace whispered into his ear, "Thank you, God, thank you." It was the first time Elias believed, truly believed, that God was real. Because a miracle had just taken place. Right inside his body. Right inside his broken heart. Right inside the silence that had defined him for months. God had spoken louder than the accident. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt alive. Really alive. But miracles come with complications. And the world Elias had left behind? It was waiting, watching, ready to reclaim him. His voice was returning. And so were the shadows. Chapter 8. The Temptation to Return. News travels fast in Hollywood. Even when you're silent. Even when you disappear. Even when you want to stay hidden. Elias had barely begun whispering again, barely begun tasting the miracle God was unfolding in him, when the outside world caught the scent of a comeback. It started small. A paparazzi photo of him on the patio with Grace. A grainy video of him walking in the garden. A rumor circulating in the entertainment blogs. Is Elias Rivers recording again? He wasn't. Not yet. Not in the way they meant. But the world didn't wait for truth. It created its own. Within days, messages from old producers started pouring into Troy's phone. Record labels. Show promoters.
Agents.
Concert managers. Everyone hungry for their lost golden boy. And Troy, always opportunistic, always calculating, saw dollar signs. He showed up unannounced one afternoon, barging into the mansion with a swagger Elias remembered all too well. Hair slicked back, sunglasses too dark, cologne too strong. "Eli," he practically shouted. "You look alive, man. Heard you're making sounds again." "That's incredible." Elias stiffened. Grace stepped protectively beside him, not aggressively, but with quiet strength. Troy noticed her. "And you must be the therapist. Fantastic work. Really incredible. We should talk about extending your contract. We might need you full-time on tour." Grace's face hardened. "I'm not here for the industry." Troy waved dismissively. Right, emotional healing, trauma work, all that stuff. Great publicity angle. We can use it. Redemption storylines sell like crazy." Grace inhaled sharply. Elias shook his head and picked up the whiteboard. Not doing publicity. Troy grinned, completely unfazed. Of course, of course.
Not yet.
Recovery arc first, comeback second. We'll ease into it. I already booked a meeting with Universal. They want to relaunch your album. Grace stepped forward. He's not ready. Troy raised an eyebrow. And who exactly put you in charge of his career? Grace answered calmly.
God.
Troy blinked, caught off guard for the first time. Elias looked at the ground, heart pounding. The old life tugged at him like chains, familiar chains, comfortable chains, chains he used to mistake for freedom. Troy clapped him on the back. Come on, Eli. You can't sit around whispering prayers forever. This miracle? Use it. Write it. Cash in on it. It's time to get back where you belong. Grace spoke softly, but her words carried weight. He doesn't belong in bondage anymore.
Troy scoffed.
Bondage? He lived the dream. Grace didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, and it almost killed him. Silence. Troy's expression hardened. Look, Elias, you want to waste your time playing church boy? That's on you. But don't throw away everything we built for some temporary spiritual high. Elias' jaw clenched. Temporary? This peace, this hope, this new life was the first real thing he'd ever known. Troy stepped closer. They want you back, man. Your fans. Your team. The world. Don't tell me you're choosing. He motioned toward Grace awkwardly. All this over what you were meant for. Grace didn't flinch. Elias took a slow breath, feeling the tension tugging him in two directions. The old life, loud and seductive, and the new life, quiet and sacred. Grace whispered, "Remember what God showed you." He wrote, "I'm not ready." Troy rolled his eyes. "You're never going to feel ready. That's why I make decisions. That's why I manage your life. You start singing again and we go straight to the top." Elias erased the board and wrote, "Not that life anymore." Troy froze. Confusion flashed across his face. Then anger. Real anger. "You're serious," Troy muttered. "After everything? After all the money, the fame, the years I poured into you." Grace's voice cut through gently. "You poured into the celebrity, not the man." Troy shot her a glare. "You don't get to speak for him." Elias placed a hand on her arm, his gesture saying more than any word he could form. Grace looked at him. He nodded. He turned the board toward Troy again. "I'm changing." Troy stared at the words, jaw clenching. Then he scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Call me when you wake up and realize miracles don't pay bills." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Grace exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry you had to face that." But Elias shook his head. He wrote, "Needed to." Grace smiled. "You did well." He wrote again, "Old life tempting." She nodded. Temptation always comes after breakthrough. He swallowed hard. "What if I go backward?" Grace placed a hand on his. "Then God will pull you forward again." He looked at her, really looked at her, realizing something he hadn't fully understood until now. God wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. And the old world? It wasn't what he wanted. Not anymore. But the enemy of his soul wasn't finished, either. Within the week, more calls came. More texts. More messages. Old collaborators. Party friends. Women from his past. Industry giants. All saying the same thing. "Come back. We need you. You belong here. You owe us.
You can't change."
No one leaves this life for long." Each message was a battle. Each temptation a test. Grace stood by him through every storm, praying with him, guiding him, reminding him of who he was becoming, not who he used to be. But no one expected what happened next. Least of all Elias. One morning, while practicing gentle vocal exercises, something happened. A sound emerged from him that was not broken, not weak, not strained. It was strong.
Smooth. Clear.
A single note, pure as morning light. Grace's head snapped up. "Do that again," she whispered. He inhaled.
And sang.
Just one phrase.
Short. Soft.
But undeniably real. Grace covered her mouth with both hands as tears poured down her cheeks. His voice was back. Not the voice of a pop star. A different voice. A redeemed one. A God-shaped one. A voice ready to be used for something new. And the world that once cheered for his destruction would now fight desperately to reclaim him. But Elias was no longer the man they remembered. He belonged to Grace now. And Grace, both the woman and the mercy, had changed everything. Chapter 9. Choosing Grace. Elias' voice returning should have felt like pure joy. And in many ways it did. Every time he tested a note, every time he whispered a word, every time a small melody slipped past his lips, gratitude flooded him like warm sunlight. He practiced gently each morning, nothing dramatic, nothing strained, just soft exercises Grace taught him, letting his vocal cords wake up slowly, like a newborn learning to breathe. He was careful. He was patient. He was grateful. But the world wasn't patient. And it certainly wasn't gentle. The moment Troy confirmed rumors to the media, because of course he did, the music industry erupted. Phone calls, interview requests, bookings, talk show appearances, everything Elias had avoided for nearly a year suddenly came roaring back at him like a tidal wave. And some of it tempted him. Not the chaos. Not the sin. Not the empty parties or the fame games. But the music itself. Music had always been his heartbeat before the world twisted it. Before fame took something pure and dirted it. Before he lost himself trying to fit an image crafted for him instead of by him. Now, with Grace in his life and God awakening something holy inside him, Elias found himself thinking, what if music could be good again?
What if I could use my voice differently this time?
What if God brought it back for a reason? But each question brought its own fear. Because with music came the industry. And with the industry came the temptations. And with the temptations came the old life. He wasn't sure he was strong enough yet. One evening, Elias and Grace sat on the patio watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind of silence shared between people who had walked through deep valleys together. Grace finally turned to him. You've been quiet. He lifted his whiteboard. Thinking. About. He hesitated, then wrote. My voice. What to do with it? Grace nodded, not surprised. I figured that might be coming. He wrote slower this time, each letter heavy. I want to sing again. But not the same. Not that world. Grace's face softened with understanding. That world doesn't own you anymore. He swallowed hard. Feels like it still tries. She placed her hand over his. Of course it does. Darkness always fights hardest right before dawn. He met her eyes, searching for her truth. Grace continued gently, but Elias, you don't fight alone. Not anymore. His chest tightened. What if I fall? Grace leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I'll help you back up. God will help you back up. Falling isn't failure. Staying down is. He closed his eyes. Her hand still rested on his. He didn't pull away. Over the next few weeks, Elias felt something shifting, not just in his voice, but in his heart. He started journaling scriptures Grace shared with him. He prayed quietly before bed. He walked through the garden and talked to God in his thoughts. He listened to worship songs Grace introduced him to and found his chest aching in a way that felt like healing. He wasn't whole yet, but he was awakening. And awakening is its own miracle. Then the invitation came. A major music label wanted to fly him out for a comeback meeting. They offered millions. A headlining tour. A documentary. A redemption arc that would plaster his name across every magazine. And the worst part? They made it sound holy. You can do inspirational music, Troy said over the phone. Talk about healing. Use your story. It's PR gold. The world loves a good redemption narrative. Grace heard the voicemail with him. Her jaw tightened. That's not redemption, she said softly. That's exploitation. Elias knew she was right. But the temptation was real, not because he wanted the fame, but because he wanted to sing. He wanted to stand in front of people again. He wanted to use the gift God returned to him. He didn't want to waste it. That evening, when Grace arrived for their session, Elias was pacing the living room. She sensed the turmoil before he even wrote a word. She sat on the couch and waited until he finally showed her the board. I don't know what God wants. Grace inhaled slowly, considering her words. Do you want to know what I think? He nodded. I think God didn't give your voice back so the world could own it again. I think he gave it back because he trusts you, because you've changed, because you've surrendered, because you're his now, not the industry's. Elias felt his throat tighten. Grace continued, voice gentle but firm. Your gift is for his glory now, not your old life's entertainment. He wrote slowly, painfully. What if I disappoint God? Grace reached for his hands, both of them, and held them tightly in hers. You couldn't disappoint a God who already knows your worst moments and still chose to save you. His breath trembled. Grace's voice softened even more. Elias, God didn't just restore your voice. He restored your purpose. He stared at her, overwhelmed by emotion, the weight of calling, the fear of temptation, the miracle of grace. Grace whispered, you get to choose now. Not the world. You. The board shook in his hand as he wrote his next words. Do you think I can do this? Grace's eyes glistened. Yes, she whispered. I believe in who you're becoming. Elias swallowed hard, then wrote, I choose God. And I choose you. Grace froze. Emotion washed over her face, not shock, but something gentle, something grateful, something like an answered prayer she never expected to be hers. She whispered, I choose you too. Elias closed his eyes, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Real peace. He chose Grace, the woman. He chose Grace, the gift. He chose God, the Savior. And for the first time since the accident, he felt free. The next day, Troy called again, furious that Elias hadn't responded to the contract. Elias answered the phone himself, voice shaky, but steady enough. I'm not coming back. It was the first full sentence he had spoken since the accident. And it wasn't whispered. It was strong. It was final. It was victory. Troy yelled, threatened, begged, argued, but Elias hung up. He walked to the living room where Grace waited and simply said in his soft, recovering voice, I choose a different stage. Grace smiled, because she already knew God was calling him to something new, something holy, something that would change not just his life, but countless others. Chapter 10, Saved by Grace. The first time Elias stood on a stage again, it wasn't in a stadium. It wasn't in front of thousands of fans screaming his name. No flashing lights. No smoke machines. No massive speakers vibrating the ground under his feet. It was a small church. A simple place with wooden pews, warm lights, and a cross hanging above a modest stage. Grace had invited him for weeks, but he never felt ready. Not until now. He stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The quiet, the stillness, the peace that lingered in the air like incense. Grace stepped beside him, her hand brushing against his. You okay? He nodded slowly. Scared, he whispered, his voice still soft but stronger every day. Grace smiled gently. Good. It means your heart is awake. They walked inside together. A few early arrivals were adjusting microphones, tuning guitars, and chatting softly. No one recognized him. No one stared. No one expected anything. Freedom lived in anonymity. When the worship leader approached him, he spoke with kindness, not starstruck excitement. So, this is the man Grace has been praying for, he said warmly. It's an honor to meet you, Elias. Elias swallowed. Thank you. We'd love to hear you sing if you feel ready, the man continued. No pressure. Just worship. Worship. Not performance. Not entertainment. Not applause. Worship. Elias nodded. Grace squeezed his hand. You're not alone. When the service began, Elias sat in the front row, heart pounding in his chest. People lifted their hands, swayed, whispered prayers, and sang with such sincerity that he felt tears forming before he even stood. The worship leader looked at him from the stage with a gentle nod. It was time. Elias rose, legs trembling, breath unsteady, and walked slowly to the microphone. Grace watched from her seat, hands folded, praying for him with her whole heart. He stood before the congregation, staring at the simple wooden cross. Not the world stage.
God's.
He closed his eyes
And sang.
The first note came out fragile, a soft vibration of hope. The second note grew stronger, warmer. By the third note, his voice, the voice God restored, resonated through the room like something holy. People turned. They listened. Their eyes widened. Some began to cry, not because they recognized him, but because they recognized the presence of God inside the sound. Elias sang a worship song he had practiced quietly in his living room, a song about surrender, about grace, about God finding him when he was lost. Halfway through, emotion overtook him and he faltered. Tears blurred his vision. His voice cracked. Grace stood up instantly, walked to the stage, and took his hand. She didn't whisper encouragement. She didn't coach him. She just stood beside him. The strength that filled him in that moment was something only God could orchestrate. Elias inhaled and kept singing. By the final note, the entire church was on its feet, not applauding him, but worshiping God. Elias stepped back, overwhelmed. The worship leader hugged him. People prayed for him. Some whispered thank you through tears. Grace approached him slowly, her own eyes glistening. You did it, she whispered. Elias shook his head. God did it. Grace smiled.
Yes.
But you said yes to him. And that changed everything. His journey didn't end in that church. It began there. Word traveled, not celebrity gossip this time, but testimonies. Stories of a man God healed, a voice God restored, a life God redeemed. Small churches invited him to sing. Christian shelters, youth groups, addiction recovery centers, hospitals. He accepted them all. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he wanted to serve. At each place he visited, Elias shared small pieces of his testimony, the accident, his brokenness, the silence, the bitterness, the grace that walked into his house one ordinary day. People listened.
People wept.
People found hope. The world had once cheered for him because he was loud. Now heaven rejoiced because he was redeemed. Months passed. His voice grew stronger, deeper, more authentic. His faith grew roots. His heart grew steady. And his love for grace, quietly, beautifully, grew too. They spent evenings praying together in the garden, late nights talking about purpose, afternoons volunteering at the church, and mornings walking through the city with new eyes. She was his anchor, his partner, his answered prayer. One night, while they watched a meteor shower in the backyard, Elias reached for her hand. Grace, he whispered. She turned to him, heart pounding. You saved my life. She shook her head. God saved you. Yes, Elias whispered. But he used you to do it. Grace's eyes softened as tears formed. You've come so far. He smiled softly. Because you believed I could. The air grew still. Holy. Expectant. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. A simple silver band with a cross etched inside. Grace gasped softly. Elias took a breath. I don't want to walk into this new life alone, he whispered. Will you walk with me? Pray with me? Serve with me? Will you be my wife? Grace's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Elias exhaled a shaky breath and pulled her into his arms, holding her like the treasure she was. The stars above them shimmered like 1,000 tiny hallelujahs. Grace rested her forehead against his. You truly were saved by grace. Elias smiled warmly. By grace and by grace. She laughed softly, tears glistening. And under the blanket of heaven, with the future opening before them, full of purpose, full of calling, full of God, Elias Rivers stepped into the life he was always meant to live. Not as a pop star, not as a celebrity, not as a broken man, but as a restored son of God, a worshiper, a husband, a testimony of redemption. Saved by Grace, the Rockstar and Grace. Forever changed. Forever redeemed. Forever his. Epilogue, a new song. A full year passed from the night Elias whispered his first fragmented word. 12 months of quiet mornings, whispered prayers, gentle vocal exercises, and learning to walk every day in the newness God gave him. 12 months of small stages, heartfelt testimonies, worship nights, and discovering that the most powerful songs were the ones sung with humility, not ego. And 12 months of loving Grace, not quickly, not recklessly, but intentionally, deeply, and with gratitude in every breath. They didn't rush their wedding. They prayed over it, fastened their hearts around it, wanted God to build the foundation before they added anything else. So, when the day finally arrived, it wasn't a celebrity spectacle or a magazine feature event. It was simple,
Holy.
beautiful, a small chapel filled with family, a handful of friends, and people who had watched Elias grow from a broken man into a restored worshiper. Soft, white lights hung from the wooden beams. Fresh flowers lined the aisle. Grace walked toward him wearing a gown as gentle as her spirit, her smile glowing with a peace only God could give. When she reached him, Elias whispered, "You're beautiful." His voice wasn't perfect yet, and he didn't want it to be. It carried a tenderness the old Elias never knew how to give. Grace squeezed his hands. "So are you." The vows they spoke weren't written by anyone else. They were born out of fire, healing, and faith. "I promise," Elias said, "to walk with God beside you, to choose grace daily, both yours and his, and to spend the rest of my life singing the song he restored inside me." Grace's eyes shone with tears as she whispered, "And I promise to walk with you, pray with you, believe in you, and love you the way God loves us, unconditionally." When they kissed, the congregation rose to its feet, not cheering for a celebrity, not praising a perfect couple, but celebrating redemption. A redeemed man, a redeemed voice, a redeemed future. After the honeymoon, a quiet, peaceful retreat in the mountains, Elias and Grace began their life together in the very house where his transformation began. But it wasn't the same house anymore. Grace filled it with worship music, fresh flowers, warm blankets, candles, prayer journals, and scripture verses taped to mirrors and cabinets. The darkness that once lingered in every corner was long gone. Light lived there now. One evening, Elias stood alone in the music room, the room that once held shards of his past and now held the melody of his future. He touched the keys of the piano, letting a soft worship tune fill the air. Grace entered quietly, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. "What are you playing?" she whispered. "A new song," he murmured. "Another worship one?" Elias smiled. "They're all worship songs now." Grace laughed softly and leaned her head against his shoulder. Elias shifted slightly and began to sing, not loudly, not powerfully, but intimately. The lyrics weren't written down. They didn't need to be. They flowed from a heart God had rebuilt piece by piece. "Out of the silence you found me. Out of the darkness you called me home. Broken but held in your mercy. Lost but never alone." Grace closed her eyes, allowing the words to wash over her like a blessing. When he finished, she whispered, "God really did give you a new voice." Elias pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And a new life." Months later, Elias released his first gospel album, independently, with no labels owning him, no managers controlling him, no contracts binding him. Just pure worship, real stories, songs birthed from grace, healing, and surrender. The world was stunned. Critics called it raw, unexpected, miraculous, unfiltered redemption. But Elias didn't care about reviews. He only cared about the testimonies that came in, people saying his story helped them fight addiction, find faith again, leave toxic lifestyles, forgive themselves, or return to God. Grace read each message to him, eyes filling with tears. "You're helping so many people," she whispered. "No," Elias said softly. "God is. I'm just singing the song he wrote in me." On the 1 year anniversary of his voice returning, Elias and Grace returned to the small church where he first sang again. The worship leader invited him on stage. Elias walked up, took the microphone, and looked over the congregation. He recognized faces, people who prayed for him before they even knew his name, people who believed in miracles because they had witnessed one. He cleared his throat. "My voice came back," he said slowly, "but that's not the biggest miracle God gave me." He glanced at Grace, who stood watching him from the front row. "The biggest miracle is that he gave me a new heart." Grace wiped tears as the church erupted in quiet amens. Elias lifted his hand and began to sing the song he had written in the mountains, the song of a resurrected man. And the room filled with something holy. People didn't stand because of the music. They stood because they recognized the God who restores, redeems, rebuilds, and resurrects. The God who sees. The God who heals. The God who saves. When the final note faded, Elias whispered, "I was saved by grace in more ways than one." Grace smiled through tears. And heaven, no doubt, smiled back. Thank you for listening to Saved by Grace, the Rockstar and Grace, a story of redemption, restoration, and the unstoppable love of a God who never gives up on his children. As we close this journey, I want you to take a moment to breathe, to sit with everything you've just heard, and to let the message whisper into the deepest parts of your heart. Because this wasn't just Elias' story. This wasn't just a tale of a man who lost his voice and found it again. This was a reminder, a gentle, powerful reminder, that no one is ever too far gone for God to reach.
Not you.
Not the people you love. Not the ones you've given up on. Not the ones the world has written off. And certainly not the parts of you that feel broken beyond repair. Elias's journey shows us something true about faith. That God specializes in meeting us in the ruins. That grace walks into places we've shut the world out of. That healing begins with surrender. And that the gifts God gives us, when entrusted back to Him, become more beautiful than we ever imagined. Maybe you've walked through silence of your own. Maybe you've felt the weight of a life that didn't go as planned. Maybe you've wondered if God still sees you, if He still hears you, if He still has a plan for you. Let this story remind you. He does. He always has. And He always will. God saw Elias when the world moved on. He sees you too, right where you are, right in your journey, right in your questions, your struggles, your fears, and your hopes. Grace the woman may be fictional, but the grace of God is not. It is real. It is present. It is for you. If you're facing a season of loss, may this story give you hope. If you're walking through healing, may it strengthen your courage. If you're searching for purpose, may it remind you that God never wastes pain. If you're longing for love, may it show you that the greatest love story starts with the one who loved you first. And if you've forgotten who you are, may you find your identity again in the God who created you, called you, redeemed you, and sings over you still. Elias found his new voice. You'll find yours too, in God's time, in God's way, through God's grace. Thank you for taking this journey. Thank you for opening your heart. Thank you for listening. May God bless you, keep you, strengthen you, and restore you in ways more beautiful than you can imagine. And may grace, His grace, follow you wherever you go. This has been Saved by Grace, the Rockstar and Grace. A story of mercy. A story of second chances. A story of a God who still performs miracles. Until next time, may you walk in love. May you walk in purpose. May you walk in grace.
The end.